in Hospitality Marketing Live Show number 225. With me is special co-host, Ms. Katya Muhammad, or affectionately known as Kat, who is the Director of Education for AHOA, although that's not why she's necessarily here today. It's really where her expertise and her opinion on lots of cool things. Also with us is Mr. Robert Cole with Rock Cheetah, and the elusive, the mysterious, the what is it, the snow leopard of the industry.
the enigma wrapped in a mystery.
Mystery. Miss Holly Zova with Influencer Sales. Holly, meet Kat. Kat, meet Holly. How are you?
Hi, Kat. It's great to meet you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I
Yes,
hear you clearly.
all good.
Fantastic. I saw your promo and I had to be here.
Oh, good.
It sounds fascinating.
Well, good.
Holly normally doesn't show up for our regular shows, so
I teach a class on Fridays, and so it's a challenge to get here, but I gave them the day off today, so here I am. No place I'd rather be.
Wow.
Actually, Kat, just so you know, that Holly does an amazing sales training program called Influencer Sales, and that is literally the reason why she has a conflict with it, because she's so successful at it. She's had to add multiple classes per week. She does them online, and one of the opportunity windows unfortunately clashes with our live show. But she had given everybody, what's the day, Holly? What did you give them off?
The holiday? Oh, the Holly Day.
The Holly Day.
Very nice.
And Holly, go ahead.
It's back from my old days when I had to say, happy holidays from the Holiday Inn, Arlington at Boston. This is Holly. How may I help you?
That's a lot of Holly. Have a Holly.
Holly.
Okay, anyway. Meanwhile, back at Kat. Kat, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to take notes. I'm going to keep an eye on any chats that may pop up with this. And as Holly mentioned, we had a precursor conversation, a little bit of a lead-in with LinkedIn Live to give us a chance to go over and dialogue about what we're going to be talking a little bit about today. And I leave it to you to lead the conversation as to what you would like to start with first. And since I have a much more intelligent group with me now than just you being stuck with me, then we'll probably have some pretty cool questions. So I leave it to you, Kat. What would you like to dig into first?
It sounded like the human trafficking topic was one that was in demand that you wanted to hear a little bit more about. And actually, I'd love to hear, Holly, from your insights as well, if you participated in or heard any buzz when you were in the hotel regarding human trafficking and training for staff, the sales staff, and really the folks outside of the owner are usually the ones in and about the hotel that can notice different things going on and patterns. So I would love to hear from your insights. What else is going on? We go out and do training, but I'm not sure what gets disseminated or if there was buzz even before we got involved as far as AHOA.
It's really interesting. I live in Arizona. I'm very involved with the Arizona HSMAI chapter here, and we had someone come in and speak to the group about sex trafficking, and I think it was probably one of the largest turnouts that we've had, and people were incredibly engaged. They wanted more, and it was I was surprised. It really brought operations, sales, marketing. It's a critical topic today, I would say, which astounded me. I had no idea prior to this.
Interesting.
Really? No, it's been a topic for a number of years. I'm trying to think in the late, probably 2008, 2007, Dominican Republic was all over the topic because they were having some severe problems with it. Had a campaign, and I think it's fantastic that both AHOA and AHLA are now and your former boss Chip Rogers now at AHLA. He got up at the Dallas hotel conference and basically said at least AHLA's position is that every hotel should have mandatory training across the industry. And again, I've been sometimes critical of HLA because many times they'll kind of side on, how do we save expenses for the hoteliers and things like that? And here they are going 100% all in. So kudos to Chip. And I think the insights that he got leading AHOA that probably informed those decisions to probably push on some folks at HLA who were possibly resistant to that sort of initiative. So great stuff.
Absolutely. I'd say most times anything that's across the board regulation, AHOA as well as AHMA hasn't always been on board with that. But of course, anything to help save the hoteliers money. Oddly enough, with human trafficking, the approach that we took that has really allowed it to be more impactful is instead of saying it's a moral responsibility to act, it's also a smart business decision.
Absolutely.
Because of how much damage comes to your reputation. And in addition to that, some hoteliers, along with GMs, are getting fined and held legally liable if they are aware that things are happening and do not address it. And in addition, some of the flags are dropping the owners if they have it taking place because it spreads a bad reputation across the board. So the risks are pretty huge. And once that's put in front of hoteliers in particular, and many of them start this business as a legacy to pass on, and just overlooking certain things could end up destroying not only your life but generations ahead of you.
Yeah, and it is the right thing to do for the industry to stand up and do this. And it's something that is, I wouldn't say necessarily solvable because it's a very, very difficult problem, but at least if you can prevent it and kind of say not in our place sort of thing and put up those various things. I headed marketing, again, this was, long time ago, late 80s for an economy lodging group. And we instituted policies of requiring IDs, right, on check-in. And huge pushback. It's like, no, we can go back to the earliest days of innkeeping. There's precedent for law to say, no, we need to know who you are. And boy, yes, sex trafficking, drugs, all that sort. It was curtailed because they went other places because they weren't being scrutinized. They didn't have to go produce a valid ID to check in. And they said, well, we'll never stay here again. It's kind of like, good.
Yep.
It's a win-win.
So what are you doing? I heard a little bit obviously on the promo piece, but I don't really know what AHOA is doing from an education standpoint. Can you
elaborate? Certainly. So as of right now, AHOA, and for all those listening, that's the Asian American Hotel Owners Association, and we work with hotel owners across the U.S. There are 2 certified trainers on staff, myself and one of my coworkers, Brandon Jackson. And in addition to us, we have partnered with BEST, that's Businesses Ending Slavery and Trafficking. We are certified in their training, but we also have another program with Polaris and Department of Homeland Security's Blue Campaign, but I'll address that in a second. As far as the main in-person training through BEST, either Brandon or myself or one of the BEST staff travel out to different areas and host in-person training for hotel owners and their staffs that are members of AHOA. And the training is considered meeting the requirements of certain state regulations or local regulations. It doesn't work across the board. It's not one blanketly accepted training program, but it's certainly hitting the main points that a lot of states are regulating as a required training for hoteliers. And in addition to our in-person training, those are really great to hit large numbers in one shot. So you can say, have all of your staff come or all your head housekeepers, and we'll train them in one shot at town halls. Recently, or this year actually, AHOA started doing these kind of town hall tours where we travel over a course of 3 days to 3 different areas and do in-person training at each one. And in addition to that, through BEST, there's an online platform where you can complete the training completely online. It's about 30 minutes. It's pretty interactive, and that's for you or your hotel staff. And at the end of it, you get a certificate. And same thing, the Polaris one that we partnered with them and Department of Homeland Security, that one's a video that you watch, and we're in the midst of revamping it. But with that one as well, at the conclusion of it, you are not able to fast forward through it or anything right now. So you have to sit through the whole thing, all 37 minutes, and you earn a certificate as well that you can hang in your hotel or keep for when any visits come. Or it's even helpful, I've heard, for the financial world when you have to apply for a loan or so on. It shows that you're taking active steps to protect your business.
Oh, we lost audio.
Sorry.
have to be an AHOA association member?
Yes, in order to receive the training at no cost, it is a benefit of a HOA membership. But once you are a member, there's no additional fee for it.
Fantastic.
Double
So, yeah.
double thumbs up. Thank you. It's very
So I'll tell you, we are in the midst of January is actually Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So we are in the midst of developing some really interesting and really cool ideas for that entire month to actively continue training and prevention awareness that whole month. And some of it includes a panel, like a webinar with a panel of different individuals that either work on the training side, are a survivor, or would possibly a hotelier that has noticed, saw something and said something and helped somebody. But we're putting together a panel. We're doing some in-person training. We're looking at broadcasting some trainings each week. There's a lot of ideas that we want to get out there, but ultimately the goal is to just raise awareness. With some of the programs that we're hosting in person, in order to get your certificate, you actually have to complete a questionnaire. And there's always folks in the audience that don't complete the questionnaire for whatever their reasons may be. But at the end of the day, they're still exposed to the information. And once you hear it, this is the type of content that once you hear it and see it, you can't get it out of your head. So it sticks around, thankfully.
Well, that's. I was going to ask if you would go over any of the highlights that you cover, because I was fascinated by the content that I've seen so far.
Certainly. I would say the one that I wanted to address the most, just because I'm not sure how many people would tune in today or to the post recording that gets sent out or posted.
Thousands, hundreds of thousands.
Oh, excellent. Honestly, the main thing, or the number one thing I wanted to discuss, are the most common signs of human trafficking. And now I keep saying human trafficking, and these signs are more applicable to sex trafficking. The federal definition of human trafficking includes sex trafficking as well as labor trafficking. And some of the signs of sex trafficking are the same with labor, but there's just some small nuances, of course. The commercial sex acts are typically not there or as prevalent. But the most common signs of human trafficking, sex trafficking, if you're in the hotel, is evidence of violence, abuse, or coercion with one of the parties involved. Evidence of an unusual amount of control over an individual. You'll see a young person that seems to be dressing and acting like an adult. In those instances, there's usually somebody kind of lingering around them. If they check in on their own or check in with the other person, they're taught how to act and taught how to present themselves. So you'll find that they're very careful with their wording and how they posture themselves, the distance they keep from the other individual. You'll find more on the housekeeping side upon entering the room that there seems to be an unusual number of cell phones, used towels, hotel keys for the room, except the number of condoms in the room that are used. And then another one for a hotel staff to notice is if there's a frequent amount of visitation to a single room in the hotel. So there's just a lot of traffic. Now, all of these, they're kind of behavior-based actions that you see, and it's very difficult to tread the line of not being discriminatory when trying to view these things. So it's recommended if you do see any of these signs and it makes you, say, something about this doesn't feel right, just make sure to document everything for everybody and anybody and keep it equal across the board, and set up a plan of action within your hotel where whatever process that you do, it's cookie cutter for all of them. There's a standard operating procedure when it comes to seeing something. And if you're ever, really concerned, you might hear somebody getting beaten, or you see something that really makes you want to take action immediately. If you don't want to call 911, you can call the human trafficking hotline, and they can set you up with somebody that's locally in the human trafficking task force that can come to your hotel and check it out, or your place of business, honestly. The hotline filters through Polaris, so it'll have a national outreach ability, and we have a lot of great resources to let them know who locally can help you. Some of the human trafficking task forces that function through the law enforcement agencies. They'll even set up sting operations where they can come into your hotel. Hoteliers generally do not want that type of attention to come to them. It's a lot to have, several squad cars show up and then come through the hotel. It draws too much negative attention. So if you get involved with your local law enforcement, you have the opportunity to have them come and actually plan out what it would look like if they have to call about a potential tip-off for somebody in the hotel to save. So I would say those are the main ones, and there's no exact fix that would work for all hotels. They all function differently. As you were mentioning before with the checking in situation, I know on my promo with Lauren, I had spoken about the fact that you're dealing with these advanced hotels where there's less people interaction. So we're going to find little holes in what works for some and what just can't work for other hotels. But one of the strategies that seems to work best, most as recommended by BEST, that businesses ending slavery and trafficking, is to just have a very long-term strategy and develop great relationships with your local government officials as well as local law enforcement agencies. So those are the main points.
Yeah.
Also,
That's a lot.
I just wanted to, no, it really is a lot to take in. The other part I just wanted to throw in there is with those most common signs, don't just look at, young ladies, look at everybody coming in, boys, girls, those, non gender conforming, whoever is walking in, give them the same equal scan that you would anybody else.
Is
You
there
mentioned
a-
that earlier in our
Sorry.
thing, our earlier presentation, that unfortunately one of the more abused aspects of our culture is the non-specific transgenders and so forth, the people that are on the fringes of our social acceptance kind of thing, where they're growing, but they're being exploited in a lot of ways. And you're saying that was one of the lead-in of people first signs of that you draw into it and stuff like that. So, excellent point that you made.
Lauren, very quickly, Lily is trying to get in.
Yes, I sent her Tim's link since Tim didn't
Oh, you
pop
did?
in. I sent her
good.
Tim's
Okay.
link so that if you see Tim Peter popping in, don't be surprised. It's not going to be Tim. And I'm actually reaching out to Steph and make sure that I'm not excluding her by.
Steph is not going to be on. She sent me
Okay.
a note. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's fine.
Yeah.
And that's one thing we saw Lauren taking lots of notes. Lauren, you mistook January. It was Human Trafficking Awareness Month, not human
did say-
trafficking. And you've got to stop those programs. Okay, that is not a segment shift initiative.
I put awareness in. I put awareness in.
Oh, he's adjusted all those campaigns. Good.
Well,
Always
it's so
looking
funny.
for an angle to increase occupancy. No,
Right.
no, Lauren. Not do that.
I put awareness in. It says, Open Awareness Month. Yes, I did.
When we first started this, for a while, because there's so many words and you want to refer to it quickly, we started saying just human trafficking training. And when you type it, you're like, wait a minute, are we training on how to human traffic?
Yeah, that's not good.
We need to rethink this. So we put awareness in there.
That's right. Yeah. Not getting. If you maximize your business through drug cartels, well, here's a new way to score even more.
Right?
No.
Hi,
very
Lily.
bad.
Sorry.
Hello.
I didn't.
Hey, Lily.
We're still on our. We're still. Oh, I'm sorry, Lily. Please meet Katja. Kat. Lily is one of our regular co-hosts with us as well. She is an expert in revenue management and a lot of other stuff. Just revenue management is her business. So, but
Hang on, Lauren. Lauren, we've reached a milestone. We have more women hosts
Than
on the
men.
program than men. Milestone,
Just the
milestone.
beginning.
oh my God, it's going to be dominance from this point forward. This is scary.
Holly has not picked up her end of the bargain on really facilitating that over the last several
I know. It's
several
been
months.
neat.
You realize, so yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about the labor side of it? I don't ever hear that.
Ah.
Yes. So very similarly with the labor, some of the signs that you see is another force, fraud, coercion into doing what they're doing. You find that the individuals don't have control over their own personal identification pieces. A lot of times there's somebody else that will show up or take calls on their behalf. But labor trafficking really boils down to somebody working, and the money that they earn, somebody is taking that. Or they might say, I'll take this money and offer you housing, but you need to work X amount of hours, and so on. We recommend, or through BEST, when we touch on that in the training, we recommend posting. We give them some posters to put in the back of the house, in front of the house, to also be able to call in. There's actually a visa program if you are brought to the U.S. Under human trafficking, and forgive me for not knowing it off the top of my head, but there's actually a special visa for trafficked victims from the labor side or the sex trafficking side to be able to stay within the U.S. because ultimately the ones that are brought into the U.S. under human trafficking, they're doing it to better themselves or better their families back home. So there's a greater purpose for them. They were brought in under, misinformation, but the idea is to still help them and help them progress. And coming out of this is, they say that the path into it is difficult, but the path out is even harder.
I was going to say, because they have to be afraid to report anything because they're going to be afraid that they're going to be sent back. They're going to go to jail. They're going to
get
or their
from,
families. I mean, a lot of the folks they're working with are not good people. I mean, it's one of those things, you're going to do this or we know where your family lives, sort of thing. And they get put in impossible situations, right? And again, they're picking on the most vulnerable people who are saying, hey, we're trying to get to the U.S. We can help you. We have a perfect thing. Just give us this. And sometimes they pay for, they've saved up a lot of money. They've paid these people. And then all of a sudden, everything just goes south and they're stuck. And, they have no money. They don't, we'll hang on to your paperwork so it's safe and you won't get caught. And all of a sudden, the train tracks are headed the wrong direction and there's no way to get off. It's not good.
No, and even domestically, they found or one of the things we mentioned is you might encounter a young lady, young boy, whomever. Well, let's say an adult even, because human trafficking, the average age of entry is around 14, which means there's a lot younger and a lot older that comes to that. But once they're 18 or over, you are treated as an adult. So the rules are a little bit different. If you're under 18 and you're involved with trafficking, then it's automatically rape or inappropriate conduct where you call the police, it'll be dealt with. But you might encounter somebody who's 18 or over and you see that there's obvious signs of trafficking. And you might go to this person and say, hey, can I call 911 and help you? And they'll say no. Or you'll call 911 and when they show up, they say, oh no, I want to be here. I'm here, consensually. This is my boyfriend. I'm really happy. And then you end up kind of looking foolish and bringing unnecessary attention to your hotel. So it really is a difficult spot to be in, to want to help. And then the brainwashing that's done, it's brainwashing plus a lot of drug usage. These folks try their best to escape the life they're in. So they end up getting highly addicted to different drugs.
It's another way to keep control over them, right? So it's bad.
What are the statistics like? Like, how bad is this?
Oh gosh, and once again, I wish I had more updated stats for you right now.
Sorry.
I'll get back to everybody. I'll share some because I don't want to give misinformation with how much it has grown. And recently there's been so much more training involved that there's been a pretty good response from the hotel side in reducing folks and traffickers showing up there. So I do apologize for not having numbers, but I'll get back to you guys.
So it was growing, but you feel like because of the training, we're starting to have an impact?
I think we're starting to have an impact, and traffickers and Johns are going to different locations now. That's the most we get. From a HOA standpoint, we target or work with hotel owners, so that's the main industry that we're able to really impact. But we're from our side, we're hearing members more and more get involved, and in some of the trainings, I'm hearing from members directly when they were able to actually redirect traffickers away from their hotel and just stop it. If not save a life, they just stop them from coming into the hotel. So reduce potential.
I'm just doing typical Google stuff off to the side. $32 billion a year.
Oh, yeah,
54.5
that's sort of
million
the-
trafficked persons sexually exploited.
$32 billion industry.
Oh yeah. Yep.
4.5
1.5
million trafficking persons
Yeah,
sexually
1.5
exploited.
million victims in the U.S., 600 to 800,000 women, children, and men bought and sold across international borders every year. Yeah, so it's a big, big business and a big, big issue. So
I want to say it's one of the top black market industries is human trafficking before
Yeah.
drugs and anything else.
Before
Yeah.
drugs?
Just because the cost, there's no cost for a human typically when they're kidnapping them and
Right.
telling them, come be a model in the U.S. There's less cost up front.
yeah, and you don't have another cartel or other people trying to intercept your shipment or something like that, and trying to. I actually, you may have that happen with human trafficking, but you have a large cocaine shipment or something like that. That's a lot different. So yeah, it's a horrible
What,
business.
from your
I mean, I don't know,
perspective,
you call it business, but yeah, it's
Kat,
the worst.
From your perspective, some of the additional training that you went through, for the certification and so forth, but just you've kind of put the pieces to a lot of different things together, so you have a broader perspective on the different aspects to be considerate of, as you mentioned, the way people treat each other in your common spaces, and whether or not they're the room conditions and so forth. Is there any other telltale symbols or things from an ownership perspective that we can, if we were running a hotel, say, okay, team, we're going to get together, we may not be able to go through the certification right away or what have you, but here, let's be aware of these things. What are some things that you'd want to make sure hoteliers knew that they can immediately converse about with their teams and their team meetings, saying, hey, alley rally time, let's talk about this.
Did you say alley rally?
Alley rally. Remember the alley rallies?
No,
I used to call them, no?
I don't know what an alley rally is.
I think most
There used to
hotel
be
owners
stand-up
are
Alley
born.
in the alley.
Most of these should be maybe in a meeting room as opposed to the alley
No,
behind the hotel. I don't
Okay.
know.
I used to call them NETMAs. Okay, for the record, I used to call them NETMAs, which was nobody ever told me anything. NETMA meeting. Okay, and it happened 8 a.m. every morning, and there was a rep from every department that showed up in the exec office, and we talked about what was going on that day. Just, hey,
Stand-up meetings?
In the 21st century, we call that stand-up meetings.
Thank you.
Okay,
Okay.
well, whatever. Alley rallies used to be, we used to do it in the restaurant. Alley rally, because the alley is the front of the line. That's the alley. So alley
Food and
rallies, where
beverage
when
thing.
you get everybody alley rally, let's get there. This is what's going on. These are the menu specials, blah, 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 banquet events, blah, blah, blah. So it's called alley rallies. All right, so I may have dated myself, Miss Stand Up, but.
No, you just added yourself as an F&B guy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
true.
Right. Oh, yeah.
We are all
Right.
something at our hearts.
Yeah.
Lauren
what
is
would-
perhaps the only person ever to use that term. You have to recognize.
Oh gosh, no,
He's
I
very
inherited
quick.
it
No.
from people. I didn't call it first. It was
I believe
I
it was
inherited it. I inherited
Popular in
it.
restaurants.
Yeah, I did start in restaurants and pretty much the alley rally. So
So there
what
was
were
an
some-
important question in there.
So what would be
That's
some of the
back to the
things from a
depressing
starting point?
content.
From a starting point, what if you're going to have your next alley rally or stand up? What are some things that you can point out, saying, "Hey, right off the bat, let's make sure we're aware of this." What are some things we should be looking for right now that, without certification, without training, but just growing awareness? What are some things that we could probably tell hoteliers?
I will tell you the one thing that really stood out with the additional training that I had done. It involved a lot more victims and survivors telling their stories, and a lot, if not all of them, had stated that when they walk into a hotel, the staff would either turn around and snicker or talk about them, but show some sign of awareness, but not say anything to them. Even a simple, how are you doing? How is your day? So having that people interaction. So a lot of these folks that are in the victim side of it have already this perception that everybody is looking at them and that they're a bad person. So if you see somebody and you don't treat them with the same respect as you would anybody else, or even just kindness, just give them genuine kindness, they tend to close up and sometimes go deeper into that feeling of not being a good person and that they deserve the spot they're in. So one of the things I would definitely ask is for all those that interact, just keep that same kindness across the board. And if you see somebody that looks like they might be prostituted or getting trafficked, just be a little kinder. Maybe offer them to, use your hotel phone if they need to call the police or something like that. So as far as the alley rally, just like genuine kindness goes a long way with folks that are involved in this life.
So I have kind of a two-part question for you. One is, a lot of the like tips training for alcohol awareness and things like that, they'll have sort of a one-sheet resource that you can print and have in your back office. Do you have something like that with some of the typical signs, like they may be paying in cash, they may not want to show their ID, it may be an older man and a younger girl who seems uncomfortable, whatever those different things may be. Do you have sort of a one sheet that you could point hotels to that they could put up in their back offices?
Absolutely. So one, through Best on their website, they have some information that you can download, and you could also purchase cards that you can give your staff. They're small little cards that fit in your wallet. Polaris as well has a really good listing available at no cost, but same thing. They're one pagers, if not like a small card that you can keep with you, put right at your front desk, the back of the house, wherever you find that there's constant interaction with guests or folks that interact with guests. So definitely. Perfect. And then through our training as well, you'll see the list in the training, but you also gain access to those one pagers.
And then my other question would be, how would you combat people who maybe tend to second guess themselves? Because of course, everybody's probably worried, like, okay, maybe this is just a rebellious teenager with her dad, and that's why she's uncomfortable. And now I've totally offended a normal guest who has normal family problems. How do you kind of walk that fine line between suspecting everybody and not suspecting enough?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. It really is a fine line. I'll tell you, after I had done that training, when you start it, they tell you that you might have some type of a PTSD afterwards. And it's true, you start suspecting every scenario as a potential trafficking victim in front of you, or that you are potential to become one at any given time. But there's no clear answer of exactly what is the best way. I would say, from what I've heard is successful with our hoteliers, it's through observation and taking note of what you see. There have certainly been false claims, and there's more news coming out about false claims of folks calling on exactly what you said, like a father with his young daughter going away. One of the signs they say to look for is if folks are showing up with any luggage, if they have a local address but they have no luggage, or if they have luggage but no tag on the luggage itself, suggesting that they flew in from somewhere. Those are different signs that might come up as a red flag. I would say keep track of what you're seeing, keep record, timestamp things, and if it gets to a point where your suspicions are just going off your spidey senses, then hopefully, if you have not developed a relationship with the local law enforcement to see who would actually be on the human trafficking task force, you can still call the Polaris hotline or 911 and ask them to come in, but let them know what the full story is, and ask that they come in quietly before they go straight to the door knocking to see what's going on.
I noticed that this is based in. I put the link for the Best Alliance with in the chat box, but I also then I see that it's based in Seattle, and they have Seattle numbers on this. It's just nauseating. I'm sorry to say. I threw them off to the side. Just some of the stuff that's there and the things that they're pointing out. It's just, just in Seattle, you would not think, given Seattle, we travel through Seattle. We talk about cities to visit and so forth, and it's indicative of every city, as you pointed out in our earlier conversations, Kat. This isn't one place. This isn't, New York. Oh my gosh, it's a terror. Every city has this issue. When I'm in Southwest Florida, and it comes up in the issues where they're discovering the rural areas or what have you, that the labor is a big issue. The labor trafficking is a huge issue down here with the seasonality of cropping and so forth that's still in existence. There's a lot of people that are coerced into it, albeit not a hotel issue, but it is in a sense, because we're all feeding this. We're all allowing this out of ignorance and awareness to pass through our doors. and not willingly. I mean, just again, it's a lack of awareness or appreciation that this is such a skill. We think it's a one-off thing, as you pointed out, Lily. It's the old guy and the young girl that looks nervous. Yeah, that's probably stereotypical, but there's probably a lot of other variations that we don't even blink an eye at that happen because of the fact that it's none of my business, or you know what, I don't want to be put into a position where I've now made myself uncomfortable or jeopardized our hotel because this person's going rant and rave about, that's my daughter or that's my son or whatever it is. And yet, as you pointed out, transgenders and LGBT community people and so forth that are disemboweled from our communities are being thrown into these situations of exploitation, and we're allowing these things to happen out of ignorance. And that's the biggest thing I want to make sure that we, not just this one show that we get to have you on, Kat, but hopefully a second time to bring this up and make more of a voice to it is this is awareness. This is fixable, not completely solvable, but fixable to a higher degree by awareness, just by paying attention to the stuff. I'd much rather be embarrassed by asking and being and getting them upset that I at least asked than to not have asked and found out that person was on the side of the road because of a tragedy.
Right.
So it is just even these numbers just for the Seattle region.
And
anyway.
Seattle had a huge problem with it. But again, these are enterprising business people, right? It's a large industry, and why would you want to? People would say, "Oh, well, look around Los Angeles, look around, border cities and things like that." If you go someplace like Seattle, there's less awareness, there's less scrutiny, and that makes a lot of sense. So they will find places like that where they can, they're less likely to be detected, and that's where they'll set up shop. So
And I think
so
it's
that's why they
also
across the board, all the hotels nationwide understand it is a hugely beneficial initiative.
I think also, it kind of gets a reputation from what I understand, and I'm not well educated on the topic, so I'll paraphrase by saying that first. But that I think we talk a lot about the border states. Like I'm in Arizona, for example, they talk a lot about that with the cartels that can be involved and whatnot. But I think we sometimes overlook the fact that there are people within the U.S. trafficking girls from within the U.S. or people from within the U.S. And so it's not simply a border problem, I think.
Mm-hmm. Right. No, and most of, I think this is one of the stat, in Seattle, Lauren's stat, 300, 500 children are prostituted, and most of them are American, right? Sort of thing. So, it's,
and then the
rough.
age group, it's just really, when I just pulled up the site and I pulled that over there, my stomach just went, this is happening now. This isn't just a historical statistic. This is an ongoing present thing. Yeah. And it is just amazing that, and I applaud AHOA for taking the initiative, you taking the initiative to put this into the culture and the discussion.
It sounds like one of the most critical things is making sure that you have set up a communication log or something within the hotel for people observing, because if one housekeeper observes it and they don't say anything and another one does, they think it's one-offs. But if there was a system of communication, any chance there's an app that hotels can get?
Not that I have heard of as yet, and that is a very good idea. I know I've advised on just adding into your daily log or daily note-taking that you share with other staff. But that's certainly the direction we're going in, right? To add an app.
A couple of groups. I would say, the folks at Alice would probably not the meeting the app guys, ALIC. Alice would probably be very interested in it. I would think the beekeeper folks who do a lot of apps for kind of back office ERP staff communication. Those groups and those people would be all over it. I mean, they're great folks, and I would think they would be very, very supportive of adding some specialized functionality, because again, it's a lot of what they do is log these things in their analytics of what's happening, and you may be able to do that, which would be very helpful.
Right.
So.
Well, also, go ahead.
I was going to say on that, the topic of needing panic buttons and things for your housekeepers, if you're able to have that live real time, hey, don't go into room 512 without knocking 5 times. Don't just bust open because, you could potentially get hurt or you don't know what's waiting behind the other door. So having that real time communication definitely would make a difference.
Well, you bring up a very good point to it, because it also means, and there is this, I wouldn't say rift, there is this distinction between management's perception and reality of operation. And the staff sometimes may feel intimidated to report things that make their, as you say, spidey senses tingle. Like, there's a lot of people that they can tell when this kind of stuff is going on. Okay. And then they can see that there's something different about this room, or different about what is going on in a certain floor or something. Yet they might feel less likely to come forward because they themselves might be chastised that they put the manager in a bad position because it wasn't what they thought it was, or something. So the management, the ownerships, and everybody that's responsible for the communication of how the culture of that hotel runs needs to make it say it's okay. I'll take the heat if I'm wrong, but make sure that you keep your awareness about this. This isn't just a line item in a conversation like, okay, guys, watch out for human trafficking, and then move on to the next thing saying checkbox, said something about it. No, allow the culture to support the idea that they could be wrong without recourse. That it's better to have been wrong and thought of it than it is for them to have been wrong about not saying it. So it has to come from the management perspective too.
Yeah.
I've heard, I can't remember if it was West Baton Rouge. There was recently I was in another one of those town hall training tours, and the local law enforcement officials had mentioned that they have an incentive program where if your business, not just a hotel, if your business reported it and they ended up finding that the case was true and took down whomever it was, they would reward the staff along with whomever reported the incident. So there are some local programs. Another reason why it's worth getting involved locally with not only your government officials but law enforcement. There might be other programs to incentivize not only you but your staff to keep an eye out.
No, very good point.
I think it's so funny that there are fundamental ways of being a good business person, and everything that you've talked about is really just one of those fundamental ways. Have a good relationship with your local law enforcement, your local government. We've been telling GMs this since day one for a variety of reasons. Be kind to everyone. All of these things are okay. Sort of, and then communicate with one another. Have a log when you're spotting discrepancies. Could be handy.
Yeah, no, very good points.
It seems like it too. The other industry that has an opportunity here are the emergency rooms. Actually, that happens to be the one place where traffic victims get dropped off, where they do not have the supervision because they're not legally permitted in the room with them everywhere. When I had done training, there was somebody that worked in the ER. I can't remember what her role was, but she mentioned that she had seen some victims before, and it was she was actually able to speak with them openly, but they were always very scared. And she said that she was very surprised at how many male victims were brought in, because they were often told, well, man up, deal with the pain and move on. You don't tell anybody about it. You just take the hit on the chest and keep moving. So she opened our eyes to how many more male victims there were, and we're taught so often to assume that it's a female victim. So.
Sure.
Right. Yep. Just vulnerable people, regardless of where they are. Actually, another group who might be really good would be OYO, who's, again, because they're converting a lot of, relatively low-end properties that were independent, that sort of thing, where, again, this can be just absolutely rampant, where who knows what the owners of those properties are doing. That, groups like that, that's, again, they are certainly not looking for hits. That's great. I would think that would be a primary thing for Calvin and those guys to really look after. So.
Yes, they're members and quite a few state lodging associations. Through our program with BEST, we're able to also create affiliate programs with state lodging associations. So they're also tied into almost every brand. And we work directly with the brands to try and offer trainings through them.
And of course, I look at things a lot more evilly, but if you produce a list of all the people who resist participating, that might help. I see. This organization must be in support of it because they haven't signed up. That's very odd. So.
There's an online group on that started up that had mentioned possibly adding like on Expedia or the different OTAs, having some
Oh
type
yeah.
of a little tag or a badge or something to indicate that the hotel property does not support human trafficking, and or that they are certified in some shape or way
Yep.
against it.
Probably almost in a way, a level of progression, because there is the basic awareness, which is good to say that the hotel's even taking the initiative, but then there should be also the rewards of the hotels and the businesses that take additional initiatives that go beyond just okay, let's talk about it and checkbox it. And but then to say, well, this is what we're doing more about it. This is what we've implemented into our process and procedures. This is our drills or whatever, you know what I mean? Where they've accelerated that. And especially for the high probability areas. I mean, to your point, where you're calling brands out like Oyo, I mean, I would call Red Lions out. I would call anybody that has intermediary inventory in different locations that are between locales and so forth. As you point out, Kat, it's not just a metro area border town thing. This is rampant through the entire United States and beyond. Mm-hmm. It's not just a U.S. issue, but in context of our conversation. And it's in Midwest. It is in the small towns. It is everywhere. So these hotels that are in these locations are just, if not even potentially more vulnerable, because there is less staff, there is less engagement, there is less threshold of usabilities to the product. And those places are probably more prone to the, as you say, this slide and disappear things, where people can just blend into the process of life and not be looked at differently than before. So, yeah.
Well, as covert businesses, they don't necessarily want to be in super high occupancy, super high ADR environments. I mean, that's bad. That it's greater risk of being detected.
Sure. Well, they stand out. Yeah.
It's higher. It's higher cost, which eats into their profit. I mean, it's really kind of the more outlying properties that would be predominantly used for these. So yeah.
Well, I don't mean to keep it's an incredibly important topic, but I also don't want to drag us down into despair and feeling.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Reality's there. I do want to take away from the reality of it by any stretch, and I don't want to demean it by any means, and I want to make sure that it lingers in the value proposition. But I don't want us to go 2 hours later going, "This day sucks." But so. You did also have another topic that you were very much passionate about talking about today, and I'm really happy Lily joined us as well as Holly, obviously, Robert not so much, but and that is and that is your data-driven conversation, because Robert doesn't know anything about that, so don't worry about Robert talking. But Lily will be a great contributor to this conversation. But you want to talk a little bit about data-driven communication technology and usability. So please, if we want to change gears a little bit and go into something like that, would be great.
Certainly. So yes, this stems from earlier this year. I went to the Ishay conference and we did a think tank session with many of the hospitality executives that were there. Some were directors of education, others were in ops or their senior VPs, president, vice president, so on. But our think tank was to determine how many associations were really collecting data and then using that data to drive their decision making as far as education. I focused just on educational programming, and found that it was about 2/3 of the audience that were collecting data and using the data, but the data that was collected fell into these gray areas of how applicable is it to the decisions you're really making. Most of them seemed to be, during the event, they had heard feedback about what folks didn't like to eat, or maybe a particular speaker, but it wasn't necessarily looking at the attendance report to see how much fly-in traffic they have versus local drive-in traffic, and how you can differ your marketing based on that. But the think tank really highlighted the fact that data might be collected, but it's not being analyzed in the most beneficial and useful way that it could be. So from that, we looked at where we look at data and would recommend others to. And I had a quick list here, but we have a lot of member interaction, so your guest interactions, or clients, where we hear from them directly. We might survey them directly about specific questions, or what would you like to see? What's your feedback on this event on different topics? And collect that information. We talk to our vendors, industry partners similarly. advocacy. We have a team that works in DC that advocates on the behalf of hoteliers. So, what are they hearing from the legislation standpoint? What do we need to be made aware of? Because if there's something coming down the pike that will be impacting our members, then we should get ahead of it and offer some type of education. Our webinar statistics. AHOA produces 100 unique webinars each year, so we can look at which topics are most popular, which ones have greater attendance live versus download, and derive some trends and analytics. Times of year makes a difference. Let's see, of course, post and pre-event surveys, member calls, and of course, Lily, I'd love to hear if any of these apply from your standpoint. We look at member calls. Being that we service the whole U.S., we have members that call in to one of our staff attorneys, or our staff attorney, we only have one, and she'll let us know what trends she's seeing, which are the top 5 topics that she's called about, and oftentimes it's ADA or human trafficking, or some legislation, something that we can just offer some more education on. It won't offer a solution for everybody, but it takes care of some of it, and reduces those member calls that we receive. We look at marketing statistics, what type of clicks we're getting, who's following through all the way to the registration page, et cetera, and analyzing that. And of course, industry data, what's going on, what are our KPIs looking like, and how does that compare to what our members are saying in various parts of the U.S. And from there, we develop our education programming. We found that our members had greater demand, for example, on development and acquisitions, and management companies. So we created How to Form a Management Company. We partnered with Alice, the events one, to work on investment content. But we're looking directly at the data from the events and different benefits that we offer to decide whether we need to take some off, add more on, or elaborate more on some. So just data decision making is just, I'm just such an advocate of it. I feel like we already function with always needing more staff. So to become more efficient, it just helps in the overall process. So really, what do you have? What comes to mind?
Well, I'm a big
You don't do
fan
data,
of
do you?
data. Yeah. No, I agree. I think that, that in and of itself, even though you're using it to service the member programs more, I think that it's also a great topic in and of itself for your members, because I think that there's a lot of hoteliers who still make a lot of gut feelings, and certainly there's room for some gut decisions in the hospitality industry. Like with revenue management, it's not necessarily math. A lot of it's psychology and different things. But if you have a robust data program and you have a data cleanliness program to make sure that you're using good data, I think everybody makes better decisions when they're presented with numbers, because the beauty of the language of numbers coming from a revenue manager is that you can't interpret the number 2. It's just the number 2. There's no emotion around numbers. And so when you have robust data sets that are collected properly and used properly, the decision-making process becomes a lot easier, and we're able to kind of test opinions. We're able to test all different things against data. So I really applaud you for using that to help drive some of your decisions. I think conversely, to argue with myself, if you're gathering this from your member base, then there may be a little bit of they don't know what they don't know. So there may be other education programs that they don't know that they're interested in because they simply don't know the topic exists, or they don't realize, a lot of people think that they're an expert in something. I always think back to my early days in hotels when I considered myself an intermediate Excel user, and then I met one. It turns out I knew very little about Excel. So I think that it really just depends on the level of knowledge that you're starting from, but it's a good way to lay a foundation for your training programs.
I have a tool I want to share. It's a toy.
Love toys.
It's called Giru.com.
Does it come from AppSumo, Lauren?
No, it doesn't. Actually, it doesn't, which
What?
is scary. This is from another source, JV Zoo.
Okay.
But anyways, I'm starting to use this. I'm using it beyond or differently than what it was intended. But what it does is, there's lots of great platforms out there, Tableau, R, and so forth. But you really have to be good at understanding how you contrive the data, the constructed data, to put it in correctly, so that the results, the information, the answers you're looking for come out based on the accuracy of the data and not your complicities of how you put the data in. It's not necessarily garbage in, it's literally how you construct it in sometimes. The data may be good, but how you put it in and the correlations you try to create can be really strange if you don't know really what you're doing. You have to have a really good sense. Like you said, Lily, until you met somebody that was intermediate in Excel, you realized how little you knew. You thought you were pretty smart with if-then conditionals, and that's like, yeah, that's basic.
Multivariate analysis are a little more
okay?
complicated.
Yeah, right. There's a lot more to it than that, and Excel does amazing things. But what's cool about this little platform, if you just want to scroll through some of this stuff off the page of it, is
Wow.
what I'm building with it is I'm building. I'm a big fan of workflow for CRM interfaces, where it's a conditional relationship of, as you send communications, they contrive triggers as to what you do. But this is really cool because you can put in your direct costs, your implied costs. You can put in your modeling from a marketing point of view, your conversions, your volumes of traffic, your conditionals as to where it goes, and then the part that I really like is all your other conditionals, your retargetings and so forth that have percentage contribution value propositions in it. It's just not a single pathway that people go through, as we know, in their interactions. Well, the cool part about it, as you're pointing out, Kat, about the data use is, you have all this data of the things you're already currently doing, your marketing strategies, your cost of operations, and all these things. This is a cool it's a cheat sheet that you can build your own constructs in and put in your costs and put in your known entities of, this is how much traffic I get, this is how much conversions I get when it comes to marketing, or from an operational perspective, this is my product cost, this is my labor cost, this is my actual transition of transaction values and so forth. And it gives you the ability to do a simplified model of whether you're profitable or not, or whether it's going to cost you too much. It allows you to actually play with the numbers before you trigger the spend. And to your point about this data, it doesn't solve all the data things you're talking about. You're talking about data usage in a variety of ways, well beyond just the math of marketing or the math of operations. You're talking about data usage in the way of sales awareness and operation awareness and staff awareness and so forth. But this is just a kind of a neat fragment of the conversation where it gives you a chance to kind of just construct out. I always like when Robert stares at his screen, because I know he's looking at the website, like, oh, it does that. But anyway, so I just want to contribute to your point of conversation. The data, it's not out of reach. You don't need to hire Einstein here to go over and do this stuff for you. Sometimes it's just sticking a stick in the sand and taking one step forward and saying, let me get one step better at my Excel understanding, or let me get one step better at what data I have and what can I do with this data. And this was just one of those kind of fun ones that I've been messing with. I use this for proposals a lot, where I literally will construct out when we're doing campaign stuff and say, hey, look, if we do this based on these numbers, you're going to possibly do this. Doesn't mean you're going to. It just means there's a probability of it. By the same token, if those numbers aren't accurate, or where do we need to massage the numbers to make them proper? Where do we need to create improved conversion, or improved volume of traffic, or improved feeders to it? Additional retargetings that can contribute to the overall result or something. So anyway, it was my show and tell portion of today.
but that's the most
prompted
important.
a question I'd like to pitch. Oh,
Go ahead.
okay, Robert.
Oh, no, go
okay.
ahead.
I was thinking it prompted a question I wanted to repose to you all. On the topic of data, have you ever had the data analytics and came up with these great conclusions, produced something from it, and it still failed?
Oh yeah,
And
Absolutely.
you had to learn something from it. Lauren, you got so excited.
A better
crash and
question.
burn.
A better question is, how many campaigns have you done where you've projected the results and they have come out exactly because you had every variable perfectly scaled? And that never happens, right? So
it happens literally all the time. No, it happens to
Lauren, Lauren is zero defect environment in terms of absolute Six Sigma productivity on all of his forecasting campaigns. But the most important thing is you benchmark. Here is what we believe is going to happen, and if you have good analytics that have kind of backed up your recommendations, going, we've got a really pretty good idea, and you can do a best case, worst case, and most likely case scenario, which is a great way to do it. And then you measure it, and you have a benchmark. You say, look at that. We got more traffic or less. Oh, we got less traffic, but better conversion. So maybe it kind of netted out to be the same, but you can start figuring those things out. And then you can really start learning and improving. And that's the key to the analytics is not just here's some numbers at the front, here's some bottom line at the end, but what are the little levers you can tweak to then kind of learn and improve and go. And that's how you get success on these programs. So I like this tool for the funnel. The very, very cool tool for really looking at funnel planning.
It's funny because I literally yesterday I got a Facebook ad for this exact tool, so it's kind of funny. But I'm curious, Katya, because you're doing so much data collection. What sort of tools are you using to bring in all of this data from your members and the feedback and whatnot? How do you collect it and make it cohesive and usable?
So I'd say we have multiple platforms. Probably most common would be our webinars through Google Analytics. And we also have some in-house data analytics individual, Stephen Doss, shout out. He takes all of our data and analyzes it. So I'm able to give him what I'm looking for and then gain the stats. Our member calls, a lot of those are done by handy dandy Excel, where we just kind of track things and add them up, and we track differences month to month. Like all of our webinars, my partner in crime is Steve Wolfenbarger. He's an education manager at AHOA. Every month we look at the difference from last month in every single webinar, and all of our resources that are on our resource library. So it's a bit time consuming, and we're moving towards making this much easier. We have recently added a new AMS system. Excuse me. It's through ProTech. It's a CRM Dynamics database, but we're actually able now to see when our members register for events. It attaches to their account, so we're able to just pull reports that can tell me more about who's attending what, the frequency of registration and so on, where we didn't have that before. So that's brand new. Like, we're still in the final development stages of being able to pull that data through our CRM database. We also use GoToWebinar for analytics and SurveyMonkey to collect data.
Do you do NPS for your training classes and Net Promoter Score?
I do not, but I will definitely.
Nope.
I just jotted that down.
You shouldn't. NPS is very effective in a lot of ways, obviously, from a product standpoint. And I've only recently been reading a bit about, from a training standpoint, how it's not the most effective indicator, which is surprising to me. It can be a little bit misleading. Your Net Promoter Score in a product is so critical. If somebody's going to recommend you or talk to somebody about you, it's usually such a good indicator if you're going in the right direction, if you have promoters or detractors. But in the world of training, it's been given some false leads, apparently. Mm-hmm. So I was going to actually suggest you don't. I mean, look into it, but I wouldn't probably.
Now, is that because people tend to grade things higher? They give it a 9 or a 10?
No.
Or
they don't want to share.
Or it just isn't correlated. It just doesn't correlate.
It doesn't seem to correlate. My theory is they may not want to share this great resource that they found with competitors. There's a wide variety, but it doesn't correlate is the issue. Which I would, to Lily's point though, I'm excellent at arguing with numbers. 2 is often an opinion to me, so I don't know if you can completely say that.
Yeah. Well, no, and we found that with some
very true. And I think it might be audience.
Go ahead.
I think Robert was going.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
No, it's
I'm
fine.
loving
I
this.
defer
Cut
to
him
Beth.
right off.
Exactly. I'll keep going. If not
I was
stop.
going to say it might be audience based.
Yeah.
And for example, our members, we actually put on a survey how they find out most about events, and the number one response was word of mouth through their peer. So if it's a technology based collection or rating system, it just may not fit the audience as well. So our best data is going to come from that personal interaction with our members.
Now I wonder now, and Holly, just to keep it in the spirit of the fact that you go out and you have, and I'm not trying to toot your horn about this, but I'm always happy to see you. You have this amazing sales training program, and when you successfully train people, I can see, your perspective of it, that they may not want to share an NPR of a high score for you to promote what you're doing, for their competitors to discover what they feel is their skill set they learned from you. They don't want others to find out about it. They want to keep it themselves. Yet I'm thinking in some ways, like from a membership organization, like a HOA, if they keep it culturally within themselves, then it's a validation or endorsement of the value proposition of the membership. Like, yes, anybody that's a member of the organization should take this program because it's a value proposition. It's blah, 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 whatever it is. Net Promoter Score, great. I think also there may be more honesty with a membership evaluation, because they're going to want the membership to always excel at their value proposition. So they may be more willing to be critical about the presentation, saying, yeah, it wasn't up to what I'd expected, and so I'm not giving it a great Net Promoter Score because I expect my organization to be at this caliber, and this didn't match that line. So maybe in some ways, just depending upon to the audience of it, you have a retail product in essence in some ways that once it's discovered, nobody wants anybody else in their market to have it. They don't want the hotel to find out what they learned from you. But meanwhile, from a membership perspective, they might be like, hey, my membership is worth it. And I want to let people know that this is a good thing to do if they're a member,
I think it's important to differentiate between a training and a membership. I mean, I was surprised to read this information about NPS scores because I've always been a huge NPS. It's just the easiest thing in the world to track. You've got detractors, you've got promoters, and it's a piece of cake. And I was surprised to read this research about the training side of it. So just be cautious there.
I know from a cultural thing, I mean, I'm working with HSMI APAC, that their measurement of whether they successfully do a campaign with the Japanese culture is very profound on the return aspect of people coming back to the next edition or other program, where they never get a bad score from anything they do when they go to Japan. Everybody rants and raves in words and in scoring about the program. But if it doesn't have a great return audience, that's the real measure, because what they found out from the culture is it's very polite, and they will not truly say it was bad. They'll say words that other people will interpret from the culture that, this was wonderful and happy, and they're like, oh, well, that's not worth going. But they'll never use words like bad or insufficient, but they'll just won't come back again. And that's the real measure. And even when they contact them, it's like, we didn't see you at the next episode. Oh yeah, no, your last one was really great, wonderful, but we just couldn't this, and this. There's an excuse to it. And that was the real measure of whether or not the campaign resonated or the program resonated with the culture at that point. And yet, meanwhile, when it comes to like Singapore and other places, they're almost blatantly honest, where they'll be very critical. Even though they enjoyed it, they'll give it 2 stars, but they'll talk how great it was. And it's like, you're like, well, why did I get only 2 stars? Well, the coffee wasn't good. What does that have to do with the program?
Right.
So yeah, there is some cultural variances, I think, too, is to the perspective of the value proposition of it.
Qualitative and quantitative as well. With what they
Yeah.
write versus how they rate.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
So yeah, NPS is it is a measure, but it's not the only one, right? Because in the work we do with like JD Power, yes, and we work with Bain on NPS, and that's great, and it's all the official way to do it. But then JD Power has its own metric for for basically customer satisfaction. And then there's the likelihood to return, right? So you have three different metrics which do not always align in complete lockstep, because again, on NPS, 7 and 8 scores don't count basically, right?
Right.
At all.
No.
And that's okay. And yeah, you can get a good indicator. You get a 9 or a 10, you get a point. If you get a 0 to 6, you get a minus, a negative. But 7 and 8s don't count, and that's not always the sweet spot for these brands. So you have to look at multiple factors when you're looking at it. It's like anything. If you just look at one score, right, you may be scoring well on that, but does that really indicate what translates into profit and return guests into satisfaction in the bottom line? And NPS does not have a one-to-one correlation for doing that. So
therein lies, though, the danger of being data driven. I think, because you can be data driven in completely the wrong way. We just had a big discussion in the marketing advisory board last week about attribution modeling, and 70% of the group, were you surprised, Robert? 70% of the group used last click.
Oh, absolutely. The hotel industry is so far behind. Right. And I tried to pipe up with even the basics that are in Google Analytics, and there are a variety of others. And the data-driven one in Google Analytics is the best one, because it basically winds up being a regression analysis, right? You look at all your data points and you look at the outcomes, and then you try to figure out what has the highest correlation between some sort of input and the end result, right? And you can kind of figure out, well, yeah, here's how the attribution kind of gets spread out. Again, a thing that we do in JD Power is, how do you wind up, what drives customer satisfaction? And it drives some of the hoteliers nuts, where we go, yeah, reservations is about 3 to 4% influence on guest satisfaction. They go, that's ridiculous. And it's like, we aren't making up these numbers. We're using regression analysis to kind of go, here's what the satisfaction says. And guess what? The reservation the reservation factor isn't a big predictor of satisfaction. Here are some other things that are much, much greater predictors of that satisfaction. So, not that it's not important, but if you're really trying to drive satisfaction, here are things you need to work on. There are a variety of. There's certainly product issues. Guest staff interaction issues. There are a variety of them. Food and beverage quality. There are a ton of them that wind up getting, in the 22 to 20% impact on guest satisfaction, again, versus reservations. But again, reservations important. You certainly want to attract traffic, convert it effectively, and do that, or you aren't going to have guests to be satisfied. So it's just a different kind of measure, right? So
I worked with Harrah's Casinos a couple of years ago. They were phenomenal. About tracking. Loveman. He
Total
tracked
rewards.
everything. Yeah, exactly. They knew. I mean, I've never seen such a phenomenal data-driven company since then. I don't know if they still are.
Casinos.
Casinos.
Yeah.
And it is. And Loveman and those guys, what they were doing, it was incredible, especially in their player stats. They would go out and they would find people. And again, it all came up with the cards, right? Use the cards, and you're a total rewards member, and your play is tracked. So they'd go, oh, you seem to be playing and you love Wheel of Fortune or whatever, and you're losing, right? So they would have the casino hosts come up in near real time and go, Lauren, hey, and they know you're down $250 on Wheel of Fortune. They can direct you over to, they'll give you $50 of player credit on the spot, put another game, and figure out that, hey, these are people who loved Wheel of Fortune. This has better gameplay, and oh, guess what? It has better ROI for the casino as well. So they will. I'm not sure if it's evil or not, right? But it's a better experience for the player and more profitable for the casino. And they've given you something of value, which you've then just given back to the house as well. But they do that, and people are happy and they're thrilled because they've been recognized, they've been helped, and they've lost more money.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I think I may be taking this in a slightly different direction. I apologize because I lost you there for a minute, but just kind of had a thought on the guest satisfaction and measuring of that metric, and how sometimes you get, you know, not quite clear feedback. To Lauren's point a minute ago, I actually encourage people to, if they have enough of a subset, pull out only the guests who said that they had an issue at your hotel.
Oh yeah.
And make that your data set, because, you know, number one, they're being honest. And number two, oddly enough, from what we find, it's guests who have an issue that is resolved to or beyond their satisfaction that are most likely to be net promoters, instead of the ones who had no problems at all. So
Right.
ideally, you don't want it to be a big issue, but if you almost look at, if you just pull those to the side, then that may actually give you more accurate data if you have a large enough subset of people who say, at least, like, you know, I needed extra towels in the room, really any type of staff interaction, to your point.
Oh, yeah. Major hotel group presented the results of running around the country presenting these guys. Major hotel group had one brand that was just cratering in terms of numbers of issues that they were having, right? You could see you have a significantly higher number of issues, not only versus your sister brands, but versus, your competitive set and your chain scales and things like that. And these issues are not being satisfactorily resolved, and it's killing your customer satisfaction. And the pushback. We don't know about these numbers and question them. It's like, whistle timeout, but you loved all these numbers for the brand that's doing quite well. I mean,
That's
it's the same
data driven.
methodology, guys. Yeah, it's like, we don't want to believe those numbers. And it's like, we're really sorry. We aren't putting our thumb on the scale. This is 45,000 people across the country, across all these brands. It's just, we're reporting what they're saying. And you should really probably be receptive to this, because this brand is sucking at what you're doing, and it's probably really fixable, because look at what's happening in food and beverage on your other brands.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. There has to be some revenue correlation that they see.
Oh, there is. Oh, and there absolutely is. Yeah.
So going back to with the fact that with our guest Kat, we hit the two topics you definitely wanted to hit. Was there any residual ones that you wanted to make sure we got thrown into the process, or is there any expansion to any of them that you want to make sure we hit before Robert tries to?
Can I ask Kat what you've learned from a topic standpoint is relevant for hoteliers from a training standpoint? I don't know why. Just curious.
The topic of sales and marketing is a big one. The ones that are always at the top are anything HR law related, anything ADA compliance related. If there are any legislation actions that hoteliers need to take, example, the NIPP training in California, where it could result in fines or fees. But sales and marketing consistently comes up and is actually one of our most sought after downloaded webinars. Because this set it and forget it way of revenue management, or hey, they're discounting, I'm going to discount by $1. It's still a little too prevalent. But on the topic of sales and marketing that I wanted to bring up with you, Holly, that I thought you might be able to comment on is recently we had two folks that work in the sales and marketing and then revenue management space brought up the fact that when one hotel drops flags for another one, that there's a point where all of the systems that held their data, contacts, relationships, etc., goes away. So are hotels preparing for that transition, and what does that transition look like? And I was curious if that was something you had dealt with before, or if you could kind of add to that topic.
Lily, Lauren, these guys. It's ridiculous.
In some cases, unfortunately, this is a brand business model. Because especially when you have a lot of brands that have other properties in the area, and in somewhat fairness to the brand, you've got this backlog of reservations, right? Which is going to be changing of a flag or something, and they will aggressively go out and say, "Hey guys, you booked with X brand, it's not going to be that anymore. And they don't necessarily say that, yeah, your reservation is going to be recognized and it's the same management company and all these things and it'll probably be fine. It's more like, hey, we can help you and you'll get your points if you stay in a property B instead of this first one, and we will facilitate that, and not just on a transient basis but on a group basis, and somewhat structurally gut the hotel right from any of their booking backlog. Happens very, 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 very often.
I'll tell you my super secret sauce of following the law but not necessarily its intent. Both brands, the one you're exiting and the one you're going to, do not cannot prohibit you to have an identity in your transition process. Mm-hmm. Now, you don't have to name it the new hotel, because there is the binder between both brands that you cannot refer to your new brand to the old brand. You can't go to your old IHG database that you're transitioning from and say, hey, we're going to be the new Marriott brand. We can't do this. But you can offer communication with your database while you still have connection to it in your IHG environment for contests, follow-ups, social engagements, and you create a domain that is innocuous. That is your transition email newsletter, like, hey guys, sign up for discounts going forward. You're going to be staying with us in the future. We want to give you a reward for that. For those that are pre-booked already on the IHG platform, then you have to notify them, hey, guess what? You're not going to be coming to a Holiday Inn. You're going to be coming to a Marriott. All those complexities of transition of brand. But if you create a neutrality place that you're doing these communications, you can garner legally all of the people that respond and engage with you into that platform, and then use that as your core. Don't give it to your new brand, but take that data and then introduce them to your new brand, but maintain that data that you've garnered from the transition process. So you're fulfilling the transition from the brand, that you're not putting them into a new brand because you can't feature the new brand, and you're not violating the new brand by bringing in brand not theirs data because it's yours in the transition process. So it's following the law of transition without necessarily the intent.
And it's the one area on the group sales side where we're actually a little bit ahead of the transient side. Group sales is behind the transient side in every other area. But we don't, always convert the catering or group sales CRM system. We'll not typically, but often will stay the same.
Yeah.
If we're using Delphi before, we'll use Delphi after, and so we don't lose the data. But hopefully at this point on the transient side, that's part of the cutover that they're doing this. Yes,
Yeah.
no?
Well,
No.
the problem is the limitations, I think, of the systems, especially if you're talking about a brand-to-brand conversion. There's limitations to what you can pull out. Or brand to independent, really. So I always think back to one of the biggest projects I did was years and years ago, down on the wharf in San Francisco. I assisted with the transition of the Hilton Fisherman's Wharf to what is now Pier 2620. And we went through massive rounds of Hilton cancellations because they weren't going to get their points, or they were trying to come and use points. That was the main reason that this hotel was transitioning, because it was in such a prime location that they were making very little money off the brand because they were the redemption hotel where everybody wanted to come use their points. So they are making so much more money now as an independent in this scenario, but it was definitely a painful transition because the only way that they could really get all of that historical information and reservations on the books was to hand enter them. So they had to there was a binder of reservations about this big that they had to bring in like 12 people just to hand key reservations nonstop for a couple of weeks to get them all into their new Opera system before the cutover so that they would be prepared. And that obviously there's a lot of room for error in a system like that, but there's just no friendly transition out of a brand and into another brand or an independent scenario, because the brands really want to hold on to those loyalty guests. And I can't blame them. I mean, they're running a business just like anybody else, right? But there's definitely a lot of additional steps. And unfortunately, especially on the limited service side, we see a lot of hotel owners and operators who go into it not realizing what exactly is going to happen. And without somebody there to guide them, like a savvy revenue management consulting firm, for example, they are likely to run into challenges that once you transition, you can't go back and correct. It's kind of, do it now or don't do it at all. Your opportunity is lost.
Well, and the opposite happens as well, though, for an independent going into a major brand. I've been involved with a group, a major brand, where I've had very pleasant conversations with really, chief legal officers, things like that, where they've gone in, where it's been a representation group or something like that, which has been a commission-based, program. And they go, oh no, after this, we will not pay commission on these bookings. They were like, no, that's the thing. And it's great to have nice, frank conversation going, oh, I understand. So you're going to accept the reservation without paying for it. And boy, I think there's certain racketeering charges which could, you really want. And boy, they say, oh, they do not like that. But that's really what happens. That's basically a RICO offense. And all of a sudden they start towing the line. But if you don't have kind of knowledgeable advice coming in here going, don't let them push you around, you will get pushed around, right? Yep. And because it's a business, and they're going to opportunistically do what they can do to, reduce expense, maximize revenue, gain benefit based on leverage, and you can't always let folks behave that way. So.
If you want to look at a very realistic senses, so there are some things that hotel owners can do. This isn't a short conversation for a hotelier to change flags. This is a long conversation that begins. It's not like, hey, next month let's change flags. When your contract is coming to a point that you're even allowed to make a decision. You're reaching out to other brands to see what the incentive relationship of value of brand and everything else is to. As soon as that thought process begins, there's ways to begin to extract data, because data over 12 months old, as much as you would like to say it's worth something, is not really worth much. The actual value of its conversion value goes away a lot, albeit away from sales, because sales has
except for on the side.
But from a transient point of view, anything past 12 months, 18 months at most, you're really looking at a very, very poor engagement value proposition. Because if they're repeat guests, if they're a lifetime value guest proposition, they're back into that cycle within 18 months anyway. So the people that don't come back after, in the past 18 months are probably less likely to be ones you're going to be gathering again anyway. Now, they're great for other values, but not in this case. So if you begin to extract, even if it's simple as taking your arrivals list, and to your point of manualization, Lily, they pulling it and throwing it into CSV files of this is your arrivals as they're coming in. And you build this list as time goes forward. And when you make this transition, then all of that, even if it's a soft part, which I mean by taking all of that and making a custom audience on a social platform or a paid platform, that maybe you lose the individuality of the people, but this is a previous guest list. So now you at least have a platform of engagement you can get to them with, knowing that this list that you're using for targeting your ad campaigns is literally the people that stayed at your hotel in the past 12 to 18 months. And, create that relationship, because you can talk about yourself still in the current context of whatever hotel brand you are. And you then get to talk about them in the context of the new hotel brand you're going to be, because social is not one of those things that fall into the brand transition requirements. You can transition who you are on social platforms in the process. So even if that is a soft way of doing it, you can still do those kind of things.
And actually, while I ascend my platform, and I think I can do this in under 3 minutes, one way that might be able to do this in the future is maybe if there was a universal hospitality ID existed from the previous hotel and had continuity to the next brand, you might be able to solve this from both a distribution perspective and a hotel tech stack perspective.
But Robert, who owns the data is what it comes down to.
But the hotel owner should own the data because it is their data.
Should, but doesn't.
The hotel owner doesn't own their data.
But if there was a universal hospitality ID, that would facilitate that. And if it was a nonprofit sort of organization that served as a registry of this and had no real commercial interest in leveraging this data and moving it somewhere else or being acquired by someone, that certainly would be it. And oh my God, I just realized Hospitality Technology Next Generation has a work group which is working on exactly that thing. And I just remembered I'm co-chair of that. Wow.
So,
What a
Robert,
coincidence.
Knew that was coming.
how is this going to work?
What?
How is this going to work? So you have a Hilton.
It's going to work like a registry the same way that DNS works for the internet, where you buy a website and you say, I've registered for that because you're Holly and you have influencer-sales.com, and your DNS says the web server is pointed right over there and the mail server is over there. And that kind of seems to work for how the world works. And just imagine a hotel that, and it seems all the hotels want to go on a tech stack perspective to some sort of service bus. You could say, oh, my property management system is there. Oh, my relationship with my brand is there. My management company is there. And you control those relationships, or you delegate it to someone who can control that. And all of a sudden, if you were to register for something like that, it might work a lot like the internet works.
I have a hard time imagining that a Marriott who owns your data from your Wi-Fi, from your guests using your Wi-Fi, is going to give up their data because your hotel's registered.
Why would they who are they giving it up to?
To the
It's
hotel owner.
Oh, so that's
They're changing
Marriott?
flags.
No, that is the hotel owners. They are paying Marriott for that. That is not really Marriott's data, and Marriott should be
Lauren?
interested.
It is Marriott's data.
For using.
Marriott right now, if you pay for, if they get a franchise fee off of anything, then the data associated with that engagement is actually the brands.
But it's not wholly the brands.
They won't let you use it.
Well, that's a very, very good point.
No, I mean, I went through that. They literally changed the franchise law because of me, so I know this is true.
And quite honestly, with this registration process, there will be an ID, and you don't have to use it, right? And for the hoteliers, actually, the way this is going to be structured is, if the hotel brands don't want to participate, that's fine. But the ecosystem of tech providers can do that, and they can point to each other saying this. Now, this isn't the actual content of these messages, sort of thing. It's not a centralized repository. HNLA had a initiative which died a gruesome, very expensive death a few years ago, because they were trying to develop a centralized content repository. This is just a registry that points to the resources. Now, how you want to share those resources and validate, and authenticate for who has access to it is a whole different thing that's a level above. This is just. I
think the process itself, what you're doing is absolutely pristine. I think it's excellent for this, but I think this is a simple right into a contract that if you're going to be a Marriott, then you have to surrender your license value of the data that you're collecting as your Marriott while you're a Marriott.
And that has nothing
from a Marriott.
And that has nothing.
I think that's just going to be a right into a contract. Like says, hey, look, if you're going to be a Marriott, then you license off the fact that whatever data you collect while you're us is ours. Period. If they go into this system. Right now, as it stands, when you flag as a Marriott, anything that you generate revenue from, that data that's collected to generate that revenue, if they make any portion of the Marriott gets a percentage of it, is considered Marriott's brand proprietary data. Right. And that is usable for by the property as long as the property remains brand.
And Marriott is not ever giving that up unless
they
are going to give it up when they hire the AI.
It really cracks me up because we're having this conversation and I'm really surprised it hasn't become more of a topic in the hotel industry, because this is the exact thing that we give Expedia a hard time about, is not sharing guest data. And, we always say, like, everybody jumped into bed with the OTAs during the downturn because this and that, but aren't we doing the exact same thing with our own brands? And they just have a much better way of marketing it as if it's our data, but it's only our data as long as we agree to keep playing with them.
Contractually, right. But what this initiative does for the registry is that unique ID is not the brand ID. It is not anyone's. It's a complete independent ID which identifies that real estate asset. And it's extensible as well, where yes, you have a core ID for the property, but if you want to extend that down to room category, room type, individual unit, knock yourself out. And you can suddenly start defining those individual highly granular units independently or separately or however you'd like to do it, which is fine. But just imagine this case where the controller of whoever that may be, and yes, the brands may state, hey, if you're going to become a brand, you have to relinquish control over this ID to us. And maybe that's something an owner wants to do
It's
or
like a
doesn't want to
GPS
do.
code. I mean,
Which
it's a
is-
code of the hotel as long as you're in the brand.
But
of
it's
the
a
GPS.
unique one that endures. But then you can say, oh, officially my availability rates and inventory are pointed right here. We're using this particular API. Here's the URI where you can access it. Here's the documentation for it. And you can decide who has access to see that or not, right? That's as simple as it is. It's a registry. But if you have that registry, all of a sudden there's a whole layer of innovation which can occur saying, oh, well, that's very, very interesting. Now that we know who you are and how we want to sustain them, maybe we want to have continuity of business analytics. Maybe you want to have continuity of distribution. Maybe we want to have continuity of ERP systems. And there seems to be a large number of folks, including some major hotel groups who we may have been talking about, who don't necessarily see a problem with that.
And maybe, I mean, having a permanent address is a great idea. I mean, in all honesty,
It's the solution to the hospitality industry if they are serious about, quote, booking direct, and direct should be to the owner because they're the ones who pay for everything.
then you destroyed every franchise model in existence, though.
Not necessarily. No, it's what it winds up separating out. If those franchise models are producing for those owners and they are, authenticated, we're looking at attribution, right? If they are responsible for generating that revenue, absolutely, they should be for it. The groups who would probably be highly against it would be the ones who are kind of fraudulently claiming attribution for traffic that they don't really have anything to do with. And those guys should go away, right?
Before I forget, thank you for wearing your hospitality pin today. Yep, Secret Society pin.
I don't know all the handshakes.
It's secret handshakes. We change it every month. So when we catch up next time,
can I show my tramp stamp of it? It's right.
No.
Sit down, Robert.
No.
So I would love to circle back, actually. This is sort of like a follow-up to Holly's question to Katya about what sort of topics people are asking about. But I actually had just sent this out to a couple of you this week. And in the research that we're doing, I find that oftentimes we like to tell our clients what their problems are. But I'm curious what you're hearing from people that their problems are, specifically from your perspective, how sales, marketing, and revenue management work together, or perhaps they don't. So what sort of things are you hearing over and over again about the challenges that they have as it relates to achieving revenue gains, increased profitability, collaboration between the departments? What sort of feedback are you getting from your hoteliers? And for those who are watching that are hoteliers, I'd encourage you to drop your comments into the chat as well.
Great question. Actually, you pretty much hit on it. I would say the most frequent thing that we hear would be not cohesively working together, that they operate in silos. So when the rev management team are setting rates for someone, it's not with a conversation of what's to be expected, potential group business coming in, and so on. So that would be number one, is just that the teams aren't cohesively working together. The other one that I would say we get challenges on is because our member base varies from the mom and pop level where they own one hotel and operate it themselves. They function as every single title under that. hotel, whereas we have the more sophisticated management companies with multiple properties that actually have a dedicated rev management team. So their conversations are a little bit different. But for the folks that are doing it themselves, they don't understand the break even point. They don't understand what reporting to actually look at, and then how to use those reports, the frequency of looking at the reporting to apply it to their day-to-day decision making or weekly, quarterly, et cetera, and forecasting. So a lot of it boils down to communication and then needing additional training. And what we found is you can provide information, but without the opportunity to apply it, it doesn't always stick. So if we do in-person training, we try to have some type of application exercise or something a little bit more interactive so they can actually use the tools that are being presented to them in the training. So the adoption of the information and how it applies to what they're doing on a day-to-day is a struggle. And this is, of course, not all hoteliers, just the ones that operate under most functions under the hotel.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And for those who are saying that the departments don't collaborate, I know you work with a lot of hotel owners or general managers. Do they feel that it's not within their power to make that happen, or are they trying to do things to get those departments to collaborate and their initiatives aren't working? Like, given that they're supposedly in the position of power over how these departments operate, what do they see as their role in helping them to collaborate, and what do they see as some of the challenges in getting them to collaborate?
I would say there's probably a mix of those that are possibly not aggressive enough and putting their foot down and setting the standard in which things have to go. You have to report X amount of times a day. We have to have daily touch point meetings, things like that. To those that perhaps due to how understaffed some hotels are with the staffing challenges that they're experiencing right now, just don't have the manpower to really dig into the details and get everybody bought in and involved with it all. That seems to be or another one I hear a lot of is buy-in across departments of what needs to be done, and then actually allocating the time and energy to take all the appropriate steps.
Okay.
Just so you know, Darian from Barcelona direct messaged me on LinkedIn, which I thank you, Darian, which I don't, because we're friends, I guess. Awareness of what the other one's doing. Thank you, Darian.
Yeah, having the right hand what the left is doing. Yes.
Yeah.
But I think you make a great point on it, because doing this stuff right also takes commitment.
Right.
I've seen a challenge for a lot of hotels was, yes, let's go do this, and starting the process or the program is not the end. That's just, now we've got to keep up with it. Now we've got to monitor this and track it and keep it going, which is a challenge, right?
I'm sure you've read the Ebbinghaus curve, the forgetting curve.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
The Ebbinghaus.
No, I don't.
The Ebbinghaus rule, the forgetting curve. What you learn.
No. Holly reads. The rest of us don't read. We're functionally illiterate. So no, thanks, Holly. Enlightenment.
I don't really watch it, but
I was doing a presentation a couple weeks ago, and I said, "Oh, guys, have you read?" And I'm guessing, have any of you here read The Mythical Man Month? And I was like, "Well, it was written."
We read a lot of comics.
It was written in
Part of the Marvel
1975.
universe? No? Oh.
It was written in 1975 by a software engineer. I can't believe you haven't read it, but it's fascinating. It's all about how if you have a job that takes one man 10 hours to do.
Oh, you mentioned this before. Yeah, I like this. Go ahead, Liz. I'm sorry.
I did a doodly on it. You have one guy, it takes 10 hours to do it. If you hire two, will it then take 5 hours because you have two? And if you hire three, will it take even less? No. I think the number is if you hire four, it'll actually take 11 hours. Like because of the communication issues, the time actually increases. But to that point was the reading thing. When we were talking about the convergence of the departments, that's the presentation I was doing it in. And the Ebbinghaus curve, it's called the forgetting curve. It's a thing in training that's maddening. Whatever you learn today, 80% of it, I think it's closer to 87% of it is gone tomorrow. And within I think it's like 60% is gone by tomorrow, but within 30 days, literally 87% of it is gone. So all this money that we invest in training, if there's not the reinforcement, if you don't realign goals, it's wasted. It's entertainment. It's not changing any behaviors, and it's maddening as a trainer because it's I can tell you as somebody who sells training to hotels, it's a piece of cake to sell them training. It's so hard to sell them an ongoing change program because it's such a larger time and money investment. It's maddening. And
we see that with technology as well. Excuse me, in a few of the panels that we've posted over the past few years, it comes up that money is spent on this technology that is not adopted, and it ends up creating the need for more tools to learn the product, that you eventually end up needing new technology by the time you get it all together. But user adoption is always an issue.
huge.
Yeah.
Wait a second, Lily, when you install a new revenue management system, you have the default parameters. That's not enough? That isn't just, how odd.
Yeah, I think, it's all of the systems. And I think, even it's really interesting because even some of I'm just going to say a major PMS vendor, when they send somebody to train you on the installation, we often will be hired to project manage it because we're there teaching the trainer all these little things that you can do in the system that they didn't know about that are actually beneficial to the hotel. So I do think that, I feel for all of these hoteliers because we can sit here all day and tell them all the things that they should be doing. But at the end of the day, they have limited budgets and limited time, and they have to decide what's going to be most important. But I think that when you're making a major investment like a new technology system in particular, number one, you're looking at the likelihood of having to make that investment again very quickly if you don't make the right decision, or losing a bunch of efficacy where over time you can't even calculate the labor cost of the fact that you aren't using the system properly. Number two, when you're talking sales and marketing or revenue, all these are revenue generating departments. This is where you have to start, in my opinion, to do things right, to really take the time to do the learning, to invest in the program that Holly is talking about. We have similar programs on the revenue management side that are ongoing. Okay, let's keep this moving. Let's make sure that we're applying this. What has changed? How can we adjust the KPIs? How can we write a marketing plan or a budget that's not just based on I have to get this deadline in, but actually means something to you and that you plan to follow and is a good strategic plan for the hotel? Because if you start with the biggest investments doing those right and the revenue generating departments, theoretically, everything else should start to flow to the bottom in a way where you can start to make investments like, let's put tablets in the room so that we can get better data from that, or do an additional guest service training so that we can get better data from that. But first you need the revenue coming in the door. And so it's a good place to start the investment.
I get to do my shameless plug. Next week, I'm going to Orlando and Boca. And Kat, you already seen this before, but the ROCKET program, the Revenue Optimization, Convergence, Education, and Training. And my partner in crime, Bonnie Buckheiser, has two statements she makes. One is called Chinese food training, which she says, you get this fire hose of data and you're filled up and it leaks out your ears because it's all this stuff to remember. And then you walk out the door, you feel very full, only to be very short period of time later, empty because you can't retain hardly any of it. Because it's too much, too fast, not enough time for assimilation, which is a point I want to bring back to you, Holly, on something that you pointed out to me. And the second is that when it comes to what she calls Xerox training, you buy a new system, you train the team on the system, and then people normally leave and new people are brought in. But the people that are using the system only use about 40% of it, let's say. They're not using the full functionalities. They're using what they remember from the training that they got on the system, which is about 40%. And so that 40% gets transferred to the next person. Well, they only remember 40% of the 40%. Next thing you know, you get a carbon copy of a carbon copy of a carbon copy. You got somebody that is using less than 10% of the system's capabilities. And now there's a huge financial system. Oh, our system's terrible. It doesn't do this. It doesn't do that. And oftentimes one of the best solutions is to retrain the system again, to realize that there's updates that maybe you didn't buy or should get or that you didn't know about. There's functionalities that are in there that have long since been forgotten that just need to be trained into your usabilities again, or dormant things that it did do that never were used that could be used now. Sometimes just why don't you put a little wash and wax on the car before you buy a new car and see if it still can do what you need to do. Now, sometimes it's just an old car and you got to get a new one, but most of the times it's about training. Going back to an earlier thing, Holly, that you pointed out, because one of the things, and you talk about crash and burn failures that I had. So I have no problems in sharing this about HSMI's APAC. We had this conference that was going to go in Singapore, and we did this advertising, and I did the advertising for them. And according to the numbers, they should have had 600 people attend. I mean, massive traffic engagement, massive click-throughs to the site. Problem was, they only had 150 people show up. And what we found out from post-interview was a lot of the companies did not finance people to go to conferences or for training that year because they were so fat and happy that they just relied upon their third-party vendors to teach them what they wanted to know. A whole mess of problems with that. Biasness, service scale, learning only the tools that are being given in the service profile. Lots of problems with that. But the reality of it is, to what Robert says, financial decisions have to be made, or excuse me, Lily, financial decisions have to be made, prioritizations have to be made, and this was an easy one to make of, hey, why spend the money? We can get what we need from what the platform we're using from the people that are willing to, quote, give it to us anyway. But Holly made a point that when we do these conferences and we shove all this cool stuff at them, and they were like, oh, this is great, I got 1,000 things I want to do, and then the next day they're going, oh, which is the first one? And she breaks hers out. You stretch it so that it's digestible. And I think you made a really good point with that, how you've broken down your programs is, here's this, and now you have something to walk away with and do. So I'll leave it to you to talk a little bit about that. But I think it's a brilliant way of taking it on.
What's interesting, though, is so I worked for Signature prior to launching my own company, and Signature does a lot of mystery shopping, which is a great way to reinforce training. You train somebody, and then you evaluate whether or not they're using the skills. It's absolutely the best way. The problem today, I just did a survey around training with all of my customers, and specifically the mystery shopping we're mystery shopping in the sales world on interactions that don't take place anymore. So we're mystery shopping on phone conversations with customers, and the joke is, every time my phone rings, I know it's a shop because customers don't call me anymore. Like they come to me online or they send me an email or they, fill this out. And so it's just such a disconnect that it's maddening and we haven't kept up. So we need to, really shift. One of the things that I'm working on right now is, and Lily, actually, you brought this up a while ago. If you can align the goals of your revenue management team and your sales team and your e-commerce team, you're going to get a lot more communication. And one of the things that you said, Lily, was forecasting. I mean, that's what revenue managers are. They're measured very much on how accurate their forecasts are. From a group sales standpoint, what's a big indicator if a sale is going to happen? Any guesses?
Deposit?
Yeah,
That would be a good guess. Signed contract.
Yeah.
Theoretically.
The F&B order.
The number of emails from the customer to the salesperson should jump within the 7 days. That's a good indicator that the sale is going to close. Yeah. If it's flat, if it's not, but who's looking at that? Who's looking at the number of
emails from the salesperson to the prospect? That's not a good measure.
That's not the good measure. That's not the I mean, you should be emailing, but it's really how much they're responding, and also
like an
the
engagement
penetration.
score.
Precisely. Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
also throughout the organization, how many different people are you emailing with? If you're just emailing with one, that's probably less likely that the sale's going to close. If you have a couple, it's
Mhm.
more. So it's, measurement, but are we measuring the right things?
Yeah.
Very good point.
And I think too, like you can make data say whatever you want it to. So I think also doing a gut check and saying, am I approaching this data in an unbiased way? Am I looking at the right data? One of the first things that we do with our clients from a revenue management perspective is look at their star report, because they're like, well, our star is terrible or our star is really good or whatever. And we look at who they're using as competitors, and I'm like, well, you're padding your results, or this is an aspirational set. Let's be realistic. And they're like, well, I can't change it because of ownership. That's fine. Run a second one. Because
Right.
if you're making
Right.
decisions based on your occupancy and ADR index mix on this set, your guests are not choosing between you and this set of hotels. So you're making adjustments to a set of hotels and customers that's not even looking at you. You're going to have weird, disjointed results from what strategies you're setting.
And to answer one of your earlier questions, Kat, about how marketing and revenue management can work together, oftentimes when I walk into a client, and to Lily's point, I can take marketing information as to who you're competing with in market and validate the argument that Lily just made, saying, look, this was built so your ownership felt good about themselves, that you're looking at your investors going, look, we're crushing our set. Yeah, your set's, not even you. You're not even the right tier categories for what you're talking about. This is to make you look at how much we have in voice. And so if in any place, it should always have two sets. There should always be an aspirational set. You should always see, if I were to tier up or tier down, how would we roll either way with it? That should be a kind of a given. But I can go into a market and show you who online you're competing with in your market for it and say, look, who you think in your star report is not matching. These are the people that are taking business from you online. They're looking for what your hotel is valued at, but going to these hotels, and you're not comparing yourself to these people. Yeah. You need to put this into your rev strategy for it, and then accordingly make the adjustments. So that's one small little crossover on how marketing and rev can work together.
And all of this
Lily,
really
I would
ties
be curious to hear,
Oh,
have you had people say, have you had anybody say, I didn't know I could have more than one comp set?
Occasionally, we don't hear it quite as often. More so it's, well, that's not an expense we're approved for, which by the way is about $600 a year, I think, when I last checked. So not very expensive at all. But I think that the other thing is people are like, well, there's no point because my owners won't care about it. Like, yes, but theoretically, if you're making decisions on the right data, even if you have to be measured on this first set of inaccurate competitors, your results will still improve. I don't know what this comp set's going to do because they're working with a totally different target audience. But as long as you're improving your occupancy and you're improving your ADR, that should make you look better against any set. But you're never going to be able to do that if you set strategies based on hotels that you're not truly in competition with. So that's what we try to come back to them with. But it is oftentimes, kind of more of a what's the point conversation than a lack of knowledge, because they feel that it's not worth it if their ownership isn't going to look at that set. And they kind of overlook the fact that it's going to have an impact on the overall view.
Yeah, and the importance is strategy.
I brought that up from you can go ahead, Robert.
No, go ahead.
Keep competing.
Go.
I was just gonna say, with STR, they offer a certification hotel industry analytics program, the CHIA. AHOA offers that to our members at a very steeply discounted rate. But in that class, each time, it's amazing to hear how many people are like, oh, I didn't know I could do that. And these are the owners. So
right.
That's why I was curious. You heard it.
Yeah, I will say that it may be owners more often who aren't aware of it. To be fair, our subset of clients, we do deal with a lot more management companies than ownership direct. And when we do deal with ownership direct, it's usually the major REITs. But I think it is the individual owners that are more likely. I recall when I used to work for Corporate Best Western in their revenue management department, then those questions did come up much more often because you're typically working with operators who maybe have limited experience in the hotel industry that are getting into it maybe for the first time, or maybe they've only had a few and they haven't benefited maybe from the different training programs that are available as of yet. So I think that may come up a little bit more in subsets like that. Unfortunately, we struggle to bring some of those clients on due to our pricing. But I think it's one of those things where the investment's totally worth it. And I'm really glad that CHIA is available to them. I've taken it myself. And it's really, even I learned a few things that I didn't know, particularly in that last section about some of the reporting that's available from an ownership perspective. I think that's really valuable. So I think that's a great thing for every hotel owner and operator to take. Every hotel owner should be certified in CHIA.
When the data conference in Nashville first started up, they had that they did their academy.
Yeah.
This goes back, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago. And I was speaking at the conference that year, and they said, well, you're speaking, so you can join us for free to the academy. I'm like, oh, good. I pretty much know everything there is about Smith Travel Reporting. Yeah. First 5 minutes in, Chris blew me away. I'm like, I know nothing about Smith Reporting.
Yeah.
It is an amazing program, and it really is some good data for it. But some other things, going back to the marketing and revenue management crossover, is, marketing, we monitor AirDNA for Airbnb. Not all markets need this kind of monitoring, but we monitor that. We look at what goes in because that's your elasticity of demand, and then a lot of times revenue managers get dumbfounded that they're pushing what they think is compression in the market when in fact all of a sudden there's this huge leak in the balloon because all this inventory comes into market from Airbnb. And it dilutes your ability to leverage your rate strategies. And they don't look at those things, but there's a way to kill that impact on market, knowing when there's lead times. And things like AirDNA, where you can look at data and so forth. And from a marketing presence, when we can see traffic build on those things, we can come to revenue management and say, look, guys, we're in Airbnb's lead time window right now. And right now, because of the other factors of restriction reductions and so forth, they're getting market share. That we can see. So what do you want to do about that? And then revenue management now has as a tool to function as to what they want to battle that with if there's a need to do that in market for some things. But that's that, again, sharing the data that you're talking about with the proper resource for them to make an action on is that kind of stuff. And then they can go back to and say, okay, well, this is what we want to do. And now we know where they're driving their traffic from, the demographics, the geographies, whatever. We can go fetch as marketers and say, great. We know that there seems to be a demand cycle from these feeder markets at this rate level for these time windows, and this is what revenue management is giving us as a spear to use against that at this lead time. And that's when the collaborations really start making magic, because then when you finally kill that lead window for Airbnb, they don't come back within the 3 to 7 5-day window stuff as much as other competitors in market. They come back on the high lead times. So if you can stifle some of that demand pressure at the time that it's most critical, by collaborating that kind of data, you effectively turn into a very cohesive team at that point. You work together, making sure the data gets shared. So that's just another crossover point. So
Hey, Lauren, I sent you and Lily a job description from a company, an e-commerce job description that I felt like was really interesting in terms of I felt like they married the e-commerce and revenue management role into one. Into the e-commerce.
Blend a lot of stuff. Actually, I thought they leaned really heavy on the marketing side, and you asked questions about what was missing from the revenue side, and I thought there was a really gap point on data crossover. I don't think they leaned on functioning marketing programs, but not on functional data interpretation as much.
The job was for e-commerce. I mean, that was the role.
Yeah, but the data they were just talking about effort. They were talking about running stuff, but they weren't really talking about the analytics of it. They were like the implementation, but not the interpretation. I thought was weak. I thought they were just soft on the interpretation side.
I was surprised that it was so convergent.
Yeah.
Oh,
I feel like they kind of didn't leave anything out on the revenue management side that's key, other than if you want to get really tactical day-to-day reporting and things like that. But I would say that most e-commerce descriptions that I've seen do go a little bit more heavily on the marketing side because it's supposed to be the online presence of the
Right.
hotel, specifically on online channels, not necessarily running the weekly revenue strategy meeting or some
That's
different
what
things that
surprised
they
me.
included in there. Now, theoretically, could that person do all of the above? Sure, effectively with an analyst, because that's a lot to cover. But I think it just shows where, I've talked about this a little bit in the past, where revenue management is going is that maybe we're not going to have separate revenue and marketing departments and sales departments. Maybe we're going to have a chief strategist and a chief analyst, and they're going to oversee all three areas. You may have separate sales managers. You may have a creative on the marketing side who's actually building out your design work, but that's not the same thing as marketing analytics. And typically, very design focused people aren't great with analytics, and vice versa. Try and get an analytical person to design a brochure, and you'll get a very interesting and probably
Table charts.
basic result. So I think that it's really that we get so stuck as an industry on specific titles. And one of the things that we've done to try and break the mold, even just internally in our little company where we're focused on revenue management, is we do strengths-based hiring. And I have made up all sorts of job titles within my company based on people's individual strengths. So if they're really great with systems and training, now they're the brand systems manager. If they're really great with marketing and working with partner companies, now I've got a senior communications director, and communication could be anything, so we try to make the title something that helps people understand what it is that this person does as much as we can, because that's really what a title is supposed to be, is a basic understanding of what that person does. But we do all sorts of things like PI assessment, Strengths Finder, and just measuring their performance over time and where they excel. And we will create jobs around people's strengths. And I think that has made us much stronger as a company, because we're able to really leverage people's strengths rather than trying to pigeonhole them like, well, you're not that great at analytics, so now you can't be a revenue manager, but all your strengths are in ideation and futuristic thinking. Why aren't we leveraging that? Because that is a talent that we need within the company.
But to echo what Lily was saying in terms of the organization and the convergence, the key is really to have the unified strategy, because then you can tactically implement it a variety of different ways. And we were talking about, if you do a new system implementation or your brand cutover, the key is having that core strategy, because, just having, okay, we had the room categorization set up, in this form because it was in the previous system. Well, maybe that's the only way that system, maybe it's an older technology, that's the only way it could get stuffed in there. Right. You may have a lot of different capabilities to set up a different way, which is a lot more. It's very easy. Just go, oh yeah, let's just copy the stuff and everything's the same. But to make that change and to map the data and things like that gets very, very complicated. But that may be what you need to do to move forward. And then you say, oh, and now we can start measuring these KPIs, which are really going to, measure the incentives and the benefits of how we're going to develop our business. You've got to have that unified strategy, or you're just going to be kind of doing the same old and maybe not moving forward.
And that director of strategy person should be working outside of the traditional office at least a third of their time.
Yeah.
Because that's where you get your best ideas. You don't get it when you're sitting in a cubicle or the same office where you sit to have, very standard kind of meetings. You've got to change up your environment. You've got to go, visit different places, really get your head into a different space and start coming up with those creative strategic ideas. So you have the analyst person doing the reporting, right? You have them doing the number crunching, the data entry, and providing you with the information so that you can make the right strategic decisions. And I think sometimes we try to put so many things on one person that they can't break out of the day-to-day mold. I always work 8 to 5. I always work from this office. I always do this first and this first and this first. When you don't put yourself in an environment where that's shook up once in a while, you're going to limit your creative thinking capabilities.
Right. They need to interact with the director of catering, with the director of food and beverage, with the director of sales, the director of marketing, with the e-commerce, the revenue, all those different aspects. So you can pull it, because the bottom line for the hotel is, how are you maximizing the, GOP or NOP? And those are all factors that are taken into consideration. And if you can do that, all of a sudden you can start streamlining it looks like the catering director who's really fighting to meet their bonus, who's trying to take down the meeting space to go do whatever and fill it with weddings or social events or whatever at the end of the year, who's now fighting in competition with the sales director who's trying to book these guest rooms to get and needs that meeting space to get them. And we've got the F&B guy who wants to do the big gingerbread house and a bunch of who knows what, an extension of the restaurant to meet their goals. And instead of having those fights, you can go, this is how things need to lay out, and hopefully get their goals set up so those sorts of conflicts never occur.
Well, I hate to say this, but it's been 2 hours and 10 minutes that we've not even hit a news topic or anything. We just basically decided to have an enjoyable conversation with Kat. Yeah, and
a slow news week anyway, right?
I wish we had some good things to talk about. I have no idea. Dragging this out of you guys for 2 hours has been painful. No, it has been a pure joy, and obviously there's even more topics that we need to bring this back to. I mean, this convergence obviously is a forever topic that we need to keep making sure we keep front in line and all of this on. And Kat, I can't begin to thank you enough for jumping on and actually doing some of the extra stuff. We did the LinkedIn Live precursor, which I had done by myself. Cool. The first time for the week before. It was fun to be able to do it with somebody this week. Having you as a guest host. I'm going to be doing a podcast recap after this. And then I got to do the Instagram TV, which I can only right now because of the followership that I didn't put on my personal one, because there is a Lauren Gray that Robert will point out to you is very popular on Instagram. She has 3 million people or something on it.
Not the same.
I think she's like a female bodybuilder.
Indistinguishable from Lauren.
You can't tell the difference from the We're like twins.
Competition there,
yeah, no. So I have a Hospitality Digital Marketing Instagram page, but of course it only has, I don't even know how many, it's 70 or 80 people on it right now. So I can only run 10 minutes on IGTV. So we'll do the first 10-minute drop on it. But I'm going to do the podcast recap, which will be only 20 minutes of what we talked about today. So we have that, and then we have the LinkedIn. So with all of those things, would we please come back? I definitely, as you know from our first conversational topic that we had, the human trafficking is something I think we need to be resonant about, or resonate over and over with on whenever we get the chance. So we'd love to have you back for that. The fact that it's Black Friday and that you all joined, I can't begin to thank you enough for. I've had our moments where holidays, when the show comes up, it's usually me talking to myself. Selfie says. So it's good that I had company this time around. Thank you very much for picking the date, Kat. Any closing comments from anyone about any of the things, please? And then I'd love to do a round robin as to what all of us do and where we do it at, so that people can understand if they want to reach out more. So any other closing comments of the things we talked about?
For anyone who happens to see the news items,
the
which I don't know.
Thing I wanted...
Oh, go ahead.
There has to be a delay.
Of course, right?
I think there's a delay.
I held my breath. I was like, I think Robert's going to start.
That's always a good assumption.
It's always a good assumption. Yeah.
It's a safe bet. Go ahead, Robert.
No. Please. The guest always gets priority.
He has never been like this before. I love you.
He's outnumbered.
Good influence on Robert.
That's it. We overthrew the ratio, so I think it's helpful.
Kat is much nicer than the other people.
Go ahead, Kat.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to mention, just as a closing remark, I should have said it with the human trafficking stuff, but I had jotted down the Human Trafficking Polaris hotline, which is 1-888-373-7888. So once again, 1-888-373-7888. 373-7888. And I should have posted that or asked Lauren to post it in
I did. It's
the
up there. It's in the chat line.
You posted
It's in
it.
the chat line.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes. And I mean, that's a all access 24/7 number. If you have any suspicions, call that number.
Fantastic.
And you can also text help or info to 233733.
Ooh, I don't know about that
For
one.
those
that
of
one
us
didn't-
who hate, no, it's in there.
Is it
I'm
in
reading
there?
it right off your chat.
Oh, right off from my other posting. Yeah. Thank
I
you.
don't
Yeah,
have it
yeah.
memorized yet.
Be
But
free.
for those of us,
There it is.
if you can't make a phone call, for example, if you suspect that something's happening, but that person is right in front of you, or something along those lines, you can't be audible, or you're just a millennial and so you hate picking up the phone, you can text help or info to 233733.
Well, look what happened in the news just recently, though. The girl that ordered pizza.
Right.
Right.
See that? I thought that was brilliant. I didn't realize that was a thing for it, and that the 911 person finally caught on that this was what she was trying to attempt to communicate, that there was an issue she couldn't be open about, and that was her way of reaching out, making the call. So there is a method. There is a method. But anyways, Lily, since you're playing Tim Peter, but you're not Tim Peter, for people who know more about you and what it is that you do, where is it they can find you?
TimPeter.com.
Peter on social media.
So my name is Lily Mockman. I'm the CEO of Total Customized Revenue Management, better known as TCRM, and also the partner at ThinkUp Enterprises. And you can find me at tcrmservices.com or thinkupenterprises.com soon. That website will be launching in a couple weeks now. And we do all things revenue management, both day-to-day revenue for hire, as well as on the ThinkUp side, we do a variety of consulting services.
Awesome. Ms. Holly Zoba.
Holly at influencer-sales.com. I do all things really digital sales, sort of the marrying of digital with traditional selling.
Mr. Robert Colser.
One caveat before, if Lauren, you are posting the list of news items that we
I
didn't
will.
get to, which if you do, I sometimes lace in items which I don't necessarily agree with, and I think they may be full of crap. There are two of them in there, so maybe I
Which
should
ones?
highlight them. The Expedia Group No Moat and Declining Margins from Seeking Alpha. You get a lot of people on Seeking Alpha who provide some armchair quarterbacking in terms of the investment. Someone who does not understand the travel space, elaborating on their position on Expedia, which I think was highly
Yes, it
flawed.
was a sell position according to them. Yes.
Yeah, another one, which I'm not saying that you should buy or sell, but their basis for the recommendations was quite far off. Sometimes, I don't know. Sometimes you can maybe make a correct recommendation without having the right underlying assessment. And the other one was the value add transparency key to making amenity fees work. Not good. It's resort fees are drip pricing, folks. It's not.
I was surprised
No
to see you
consumer
put that
benefit.
one there.
Well, no, because
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
full of
yeah.
crap and indefensible. So, but besides that, but anyway, you can find me at Robert K. Cole on social media or rockcheetah.com.
And Kat, as our guest host, which you're more than welcome to come back at any time you would like and displace the balance of power anytime you wish.
Yes, I can do that.
You have an open invitation. Join us at will, and just let us know the opportunity. We'll always, we'd love to have you back. And of course, we want to schedule a time back for you to continue the conversation as we go forward, especially with human trafficking. It'd be great, especially sometime maybe in January, given the month that it is. So it'd be great to have you back right after the holidays, kind of thing.
Before I depart from you all, I wanted to just make a little correction. So Kat is my nickname, which is actually short for Khadija.
I say it totally wrong. All right, how many times have I said people's names wrong? I say them wrong all the time.
I figured
but you're
Words
consistent.
in general.
Words in general.
I say Katya. I just like Katya.
It's okay. The J is silent in many languages, so it throws people off.
Say it
But,
right again. Say it right again. What is it supposed to be?
Khadija.
I would have never guessed that. I would have never guessed that.
You're trying too hard, Lauren.
I have said this. You've let me say this for how many years now?
Well, you always go back to Kat, so I was like, all right.
Yeah, I thought it was that.
It works, right?
But
Okay.
Who did I, Robert, what was the last name I butchered? What was it?
Today,
I
it's
was good at-
soluble.
it's
I'm pretty
much
good at
easier. Let's think back to one that you haven't butchered.
no, I can't even.
Oh wait, your own name. Your own name. You
Laurenisms.
got at least half. Yeah, you got Lauren.
Yeah, this is
half the
Lorraine
time.
Gray. Yeah, no. Yeah, I've butchered. Oh gosh, I don't know
They're
how many
called
names. Ed got me.
Laurenisms.
Yeah, pretty much they are. But yes, I apologize for have ever always been literally for I don't know what has it been 2 years?
Well,
I
yeah,
think
that we've known each other, but you usually just say cat.
yeah, well,
It's okay. It's more so for the viewers. Just
please say her name right. Don't listen to me.
make sure
Lauren,
to tune in and listen.
Lauren can only be taught through getting hit by lightning. And if you do that, then he will.
And single syllable words. Do not go three syllable on me. I will blow it every time.
Yeah.
So, Kat, where is it they can find you and what do you do and all that good stuff? I'm going to stick with the one I know.
It's okay. So I'm Director of Education for AHOA, AHOA, but I do quite a bit of professional development training and other things outside of AHOA. The easiest way to reach me where your emails will not get lost in the mix of life would be at kat.m.speaks@gmail.com. Nice and easy. So I can triage all of you very easily to the top.
Good stuff. Now, from an AHOA perspective, your big conference is coming up in April?
It is. Oh, shameless plug time? Yes. On April 13th to 17th in Orlando is the AHOA conference where actually we will have a CHIA certification program available, offering that human trafficking awareness training there as well. And we are working on another certificate program on day one, but we are chock full of education, great trade show opportunities. If you're in the hospitality industry, it is definitely a great, fun conference to attend. There's a lot of networking opportunities, and we'll be in lovely Orlando. I think we're close to SeaWorld and all the good stuff. So there's more to do than just become educated and make connections.
Perfect. Well, for this episode and all previous 224, you can go to, at least for now, because we're going to be changing it to his own home soon, hospitalitydigitalmarketing.com/live. Look for show number 225. There you'll see Robert's link to his list, the replay of this show, in case you didn't see in its entirety or segments you want to go back to with the time list as to dates, times that we started talking about topics. You'll be able to go into it for that. As always, we will now forward going having a podcast as a short recap of our content for those who don't have the 2 hours and 21 minutes of conversation time to listen to. But it gives you a chance to get to the highlights of what we talked about. And for those who did watch us on the variety of channels, all the Facebooks, the Twitters, the LinkedIn, the YouTubes, and so forth, thank you very much for your in and outs on the audiences. And to Darian for reaching out to me directly on LinkedIn. And till next Friday, show number 226. That's not our show that we're going to be having another all-women show. That's on the 13th. That's the week after.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe next week we'll be on our new platform, which gives us 10 talking heads. And like I say, Kat, if you find time that you want to join us or jump in, by all means, you'll be welcome. We'll have plenty of extra little square spaces to go on talking heads. And we'll just mute Robert and myself so you guys get a chance to talk and we'll just smile and wave. But until next week, thank you all very much for participating. Hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. For those in countries that will see this be rebroadcasted, we do rebroadcasting in the Asia Pacific region, 11:30 Sydney time, and in London, 11:30 London time on Wednesdays. But Happy Remembrance Day for all those countries that are participating in that for this weekend. Australia, no, in particular, Canada, and so forth. So for that, thank you all very much for your time today, and we will see you all next week.
Bye.